Welcome to Champagne Problems Podcast. I am your host, Robbie Shaw. Join us as we explore mental and emotional well-being, physical optimization, and the journey to discovering your highest self. Champagne Problems is brought to you in proud partnership with Bond Buzz, the alcohol-free social spirit. Laura King Edwards, welcome to Champagne Problems.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you in. I like to start with how we know each other. And often I have guests that I do not know, and so it's very short. And you and I don't know each other that well, but well enough. And I'll start by saying we crossed paths in a business meeting. Former employer of yours, and the meeting went very well. We seemed to like each other. Sparks flew, and business was created. And then I have since followed you, and I mean, we connected on LinkedIn, and I've just followed your kind of path professionally. But in doing so, I see some of your personal stuff, and that is really what caught my eye more than anything. And it is just. We're going to get into it, but it is just so inspirational and admirable and respectable. And man, I'm excited to dig in. It sounds like you've had quite the journey. And let's do a little background. So bio. Where are you from? I know this answer, but please share with our millions of listeners.
So I'm a Charlotte unicorn. I was
right. You and me both, the two unicorns.
Yeah, exactly. Born and raised. The two are sitting here in this room. Born and raised in Charlotte. Really proud of that. And finally, tiptoed over the border and moved into South Carolina.
That's crazy.
It was almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's been a great journey for me. I've really enjoyed my new home in Fort Mill, South Carolina. But Charlotte's always going to be home. So much history here, so many great things happening in the city now.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a podcast studio down the street from the hospital where I was born.
Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah. So, and I will say too, I'm really excited to be here, Robbie. I love the podcast format. I will tell you, in the business meeting where we met, I had been trying for so long in my marketing career to help launch a podcast. I've believed in the format so much for a long time. And so was excited not only to help one of my former clients launch their podcast, but also that chance meeting where, led to sitting in the studio talking to you now. So really excited.
Oh, no. Well, that's cool to hear. Very cool to hear. I'm obviously a believer as well. We're just trying to get everybody to be one. It's taking some time.
I hear you.
All right. So, you went to South Mech, right?
I went to South Mech
Sabre.
High School. Yep.
Go Sabres. My mom was a Sabre.
2000.
And did you grow up in South Charlotte, or?
I did. So when I was born, we lived in Pineville, which I think has since been annexed and part of Charlotte now. And I moved into the South Park area when I was 2 years old, and my parents are still there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So don't go very far. Again, when I went and got a South Carolina driver's license, that was a big deal.
You're moving out of state?
That was actually the first time in my life that my permanent address zip code changed.
Huh. Golly.
And I was in my 30s by that point. So the apple does not fall far from the tree, but a lot of that has to do with family. And you asked me about my bio. Family is a really big part of who I am today, all of the different things I do, whether it's personally or professionally. And I think, if we can be proud of where we came from, that's something to be thankful for. And my parents have taught me so much about the world and how to navigate it. And you'll certainly hear more about my mom in particular, because she's been a big part of my journey as a rare disease advocate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, before we jump directly into that, which I'm anxious to do, but let's just give the listeners a little bit of your professional journey. Just give us a little kind of post-college up until now, if you can just do that in a quick timeline.
Yeah. So I went to Carolina, go Tar Heels.
Go Heels.
I was an English literature major, so of course I didn't know what I was going to do with that. I didn't want to be a teacher. I love teachers, but it wasn't for me. I kind of fell into marketing. My senior year of college, I did an internship with Sports Illustrated.
Mm.
I thought I wanted to be a sports writer. Ended up being a marketing internship, and here, 20 years later, I've been in marketing my entire career. I started my career at Novant Health. Was a really interesting period of growth for me, and learned a lot about the healthcare space and medicine. I had never wanted to be a doctor, but was always fascinated by it. And then went over to the agency side. I was at Ray Ward for
Mm-hmm.
about 11 years. And Robbie, that's where our paths crossed, of course,
It
late
is.
last year. And I recently joined Premier, which is a healthcare improvement company based out of Charlotte. And there have been some really exciting connections for me in that space, where I'm supporting applied sciences and working on communications related to research that's really compelling and impactful. And so, a lot of unexpected crossover with my personal life and what I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm. Wow. The marketing space is it's so fascinating to me. And I guess older I get, but more so where I am now professionally has led me to really being entrenched in that space. But at the same time, sales and entrepreneurship and even having a private practice in mental health, like all of that requires some level of marketing prowess.
Mm-hmm.
It demands understanding the human. It demands understanding perception. I was a sociology major, which is, I just constantly, and I did it by choice. I'm fascinated with how people see and view and why. And that's fascinating to me. So I've always done sales jobs, but now I'm in this place where people sit down and not only do we have conversations, but there is an aspect of what you're saying and how you're saying it and where you're going with messaging based on how you want to be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives a little bit of a scripted kind of inauthentic feel. But that's how I don't walk out just willy-nilly in public. Like I know people are looking and thinking, and I kind of act accordingly. You have a brand. Exactly. It's just a fascinating space. I don't know why I went on that rant, but
no, I'm with you though, Robbie. I love marketing. Again, it's a career I kind of fell into accidentally and never left. And I think there's so many different parts of marketing. There's the product and pricing and business strategy and all of that side of it. But then there's also the much more human storytelling side that you were talking about. So I'm in marketing communications specifically, and storytelling, what's more human than telling stories? If you think about all of the things that we have in common with other life forms on this planet, the one thing that really separates humans is telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fascinating part of this business.
Yeah, it really is. That's how we market everything we do is based in storytelling. And even when you're working with someone who is selling some product that nobody has an interest in, that's not what it's about. It's about your communication with your conversationalist and how you want to build trust and talk genuinely and vulnerably. Mm-hmm. And that's what people are drawn to. I love it. All right. So now you're with Premier. All right. Well, let's just go back into some of the personal stuff. And, you mentioned how the healthcare place is where you've been, I guess, on bookends of your middle employer.
You got it.
And early on, had you gone through the journey with your personal experience with your sister yet, or was that more recent?
So my sister Taylor received a devastating rare disease diagnosis in 2006. So I had only been out of college for 2 years. I was working at Novant Health at the time in the marketing department. I had been married for exactly 1 month. My husband and I actually woke up that morning and kind of jokingly congratulated ourselves on our 1-month anniversary. It was like, we can do that. We can get through this, right?
Yeah.
And I got a call from my mom about 2 hours later.
Oh my
And people who've been in Charlotte a long time will probably recognize the Belk House, which is on the hospital campus there. And at the time, our offices were in that building. And Yeah, I think when we go through emotional, really impactful, life-changing moments, think about all of the sensory details that we remember.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember what the sun looked like slanting through the windows that day. I remember what the plaster walls in that old house looked like. I remember
Wow.
what the building smelled like, and I remember kind of that just ice in my veins,
Mm-hmm.
as I tried to comprehend what my mom was telling me. I was 24 years old at the time. I had a much younger sister. Taylor was born when I was a junior at South Meck High School.
Gotcha.
I was actually at soccer practice that the night that she was born. And the attitudinal teenager that I was, I didn't go to the hospital to see her because
Nah.
I wanted to play in the tournament that weekend, so I stayed at
There's
practice.
more important things going on.
But Taylor was easy to love, and despite the 16-year age difference, we became fast friends. And she had a much easier early life than I did. I actually had brain surgery when I was born.
Wow.
So the kind of bad joke between my parents and me has all long been that two of their three children have actually undergone pretty harrowing brain surgery.
Wow.
But I ended up in a much better place. Taylor was my sister. She was born healthy. She was vibrant, vivacious. I mean, she taught herself to read at age 3 in
Really?
the mother's morning out at our church uptown, and she had a lot of spunk. And I think that people who have much younger siblings or were a much younger sibling maybe understand that when you're the little one in the house, you kind of have to develop um, that that streak.
Mm-hmm.
And Taylor, she knew how to take care of herself. She knew how to keep up with her much older brother and sister. And I just loved her so much. I moved into my freshman dorm at UNC on her second birthday. And, you think about
Wow.
what a lot of kids starting in college are excited about. And I was excited about college, but I was really I was really thinking about how much I was going to miss
Oh
that
man.
toddler
Yeah.
who was going to be 2 hours down the road. So
Hmm.
we had a great relationship. She's always been a big part of my life.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow, Laura. Man, I'm. There's anytime you hear stories like this, there's part of you that wants to try to relate, and I can't. That's deep. Um, and not just the traumatic piece, the relationship. I mean, a 16-year older sibling is not something I understand. It's got to be. Has to be a parental kind of a feel to it, right?
There was absolutely. My mom was working full time the summer Taylor turned 1, and instead of working a retail job at South Park Mall, my mom told me she needed me to keep Taylor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I kept Taylor full time
Oh
that
wow.
summer, and I think that's when we really fell in love. She was almost, let's see, she was almost 1 at that point, and even moments like, sitting on the couch in the basement of my parents' house and, falling asleep together in front of a cartoon. And she used to do this thing even when she was a newborn. She would always curl her fingers around my pinky.
Mm-hmm.
And, that seems like such a small thing. But when my son was born, obviously many years later, he did the same thing.
Oh my God.
So it was just, there are all these little whispers of Taylor. But yeah, it was awesome having a sibling that much younger. Totally different dynamic from the one that I share with my brother, who
Mm-hmm.
is 5 years younger than me, and we beat up on each other. I mean, I don't think we
Just
got along until
standard war zone.
he went to college. we literally used to physically beat on each other.
Yeah.
I love you, Stephen. Um, but yeah, I go back to that day when I was sitting at work at the hospital. Again, I'm 24 years old. I felt like I was on top of the world, Robbie. I mean, I had a great job. I was working on a novel. I've always wanted to be an author. I had just bought my first house. I was a newlywed. I just thought, what else could I possibly want out of this life
Mm-hmm.
right now? And being a parent now, I sort of, kind of, but not really understand what my parents went through that day.
Right.
Because as close as Taylor and I were, having a son, I can't even fathom
Yeah.
what getting a diagnosis like that might be. And to share a little bit more, so Taylor had been dealing with some night vision issues. And then we noticed, like, when she would watch TV, she would kind of watch it out of the corner of her eye, like her central vision was going, but not peripheral. And she started having, some weird issues in school. This was a kid who taught herself to read at 3. All of a sudden, she's struggling with simple math, like to the point of tears, and she's struggling with reading comprehension. She was diagnosed with a nonverbal learning disability, but then, of course, there was the vision piece too. She also got a retinitis pigmentosa diagnosis, which is a more common eye disease. But she was going to a neurologist in Charlotte, and the neurologist had just recently diagnosed another little boy about the same age with this devastating neurodegenerative inherited disease. She told my parents, don't worry yet. There are just some similarities, and I want to, good doctors, they rule out all possibilities. It's almost a process of elimination, and so they did the testing, and unfortunately, of course, it came back that she had this disease, and it's called CLN1, or neuronal ceroid lipofuscinosis. The more common name, that's a lot easier to remember and to spell, is Batten disease.
Batten disease.
Batten disease. So Batten disease is a group of disorders. The last time I checked, there were about 14 of them, and it kind of depends on what, they're all caused by different defective genes. It is an inherited recessive disease, which means that both parents have to carry that gene. And then each child has a 25% chance of being affected. So we talked a lot about the sibling relationship. I will tell you too, Robbie, one of the things, it probably a day doesn't go by that, I don't think about the card that I drew. Because as Taylor's sister and her closest genetic match walking this planet, I had just as much of a chance of getting sick as she did.
Yeah.
I'm a carrier.
Wow.
So I got one. What that means in basic terms is I have one good copy and I have one bad copy.
Okay.
And I look at the life that I've been able to live. I mean, I have a career. I have, a family. I have a little boy who's finishing up kindergarten this summer. And my sister's story obviously ended much differently. But my life changed on July 24th, 2006. A lot has happened since then, but, we have those moments in life where it's like we come to a fork in the road. And we somehow know, even in that moment, that everything that happens from that point forward is going to be deeply impacted by what happened at that time. And that's certainly true for me.
Wow. And so diagnosis on, how long was that? And
so it is depending on the patient or the child, the rate of progression can vary. Taylor was a few weeks shy of her 8th birthday when she was diagnosed. She was going into the 3rd grade at the Fletcher School in Charlotte. And not to jump too far ahead in the story, but Taylor died when she was 20.
Okay.
So for 13 long years or so, my family fought this, and nobody fought harder than Taylor. And it's really sad. We're talking about a very sad topic. It, on the surface is a very sad ending, but whenever I talk about my sister and whenever I talk about this experience, I really try to remember to remind not only myself, but, to share with anybody who's listening that it's so much better to focus on the good. And if you think about the most horrible things that can happen in this, even the most, unimaginable tragedies, there's always something good. And I think about, even on the most basic level, the perspective that I've gained. But then I think about all the work that we've been able to do because of Taylor's life and what she inspired. So we founded a nonprofit organization very soon after she was diagnosed. And I like to joke that, my mom was the career volunteer. She's been the president of about every nonprofit organization, volunteer organization in the city that you can think of. She knew how to tell a story. She knew how to inspire action. She knew how to make people want to give back and be part of something bigger than themselves. And I was a writer and a storyteller and young in my, early in my marketing career. And I thought, surely we can put these two things together and we can make a difference. And I was young and, idealistic and determined, and I didn't really take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And the day that geneticists told my parents there's nothing they could do, that didn't sit well with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly didn't sit well with my parents. And, there's always something we can do.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that I've had to learn, and I talk about this a lot in my book, the biggest thing I've had to learn is that you can still believe even if, the end doesn't look exactly like you thought it would. And I think if we set our sights on certain goals, part of growth sometimes is learning that we might not be able to achieve that goal, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a different goal or a bigger goal or a better goal. And, I have a very complicated relationship with failure. What does failure mean? Because Taylor died, does that mean that I failed?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a long time where I thought that it did.
Yeah.
And that was really, I went through some periods of depression when Taylor was sick, when I started to understand that everything we were doing was great, but it wasn't going to be in time for her. And that was really hard. I always thought if I spent a little bit more time on our website, or if I wrote one more blog, or if we held one more fundraiser, and if I don't do this, then she's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure.
And I had to learn, that failure takes many forms, and so does success.
Well, do you even believe in the word failure?
I think the only time I believe, the only real failure is when we don't try, or we don't start. I think there's always something we can do. I wrote something on LinkedIn last week. I think you actually saw it. I in the many things that I've done as part of this journey, I've run 3 half marathons blindfolded. And the last one I did, and there's a reason for that. We can get to that. But the last one I did, I was actually trying to set a world record. Mm-hmm. And this was in December of 2023. I absolutely had the physical ability and the emotional willpower to set that world record. It was a really dangerous course. We did it down at the Kiowa Half Marathon in South Carolina. It's a very fast course, if you can see. If you can't see, right. It's very hard. And that's a point that I make to people, is that, I've through these experiences of running blind, it's given me another lens, another look into Taylor's world, because she went blind as part of her disease, and she figured out ways to compensate. But she, quote unquote, saw the world in a very different way than you or I do. Mm-hmm. When Taylor was blind, my parents have a 3-story house, and she would be on the top floor, and the phone would ring, and it would be for her, and she would run down those stairs like a bat out of hell. No cane. She memorized all of her surroundings. She didn't like to use the cane at school because it made her different. Mm-hmm. So she memorized the hallways of her small school. But perspective is everything. And, failure, failure's an interesting thing. When I tried to set that world record, we had to run the race, and it was a half marathon. I had to finish in 1 hour and 55 minutes, which, as a sighted runner, I've blown out of the water. Mm-hmm. I'm not a superstar, but I've run some fast races, but it's much harder when you can't see. And we ended up doing it in 1 hour and 57 minutes and change. And there were moments in that day and the days that followed where I thought, if I had only pushed harder here, or if I had ignored my muscles screaming at this point in the race, or if I try, I didn't try hard enough. If I had trained just a little bit more.
Sure.
But
And that's naturally what you're going to do, right?
Yeah. But as my always wise mother said to me, the moment you came up to the starting line, you had succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
Because you had done all the training. And that's what I think we forget in sports or in any kind of competition, is that the training is so much of the journey. I mean, the competition is almost like an exclamation point, right?
Mm-hmm.
We forget about all of the training that has to go on behind the scenes. But the moment I set foot on that race course and set out to do something so dangerous, but I had faith. I had faith in my guide, who has been with me for all of my blindfolded races. I had faith in Taylor to lead me. I had faith in my 40-some-year-old body to be able to stay together, and my rebuilt left ankle to not break on the course. So it was not a failure.
No, definitely not.
It's something I'm really proud of, but everything I've ever done has been because of my sister.
Wow, that is powerful. Wow, Laura. It makes me think of just where I can make sense is the basketball team that goes undefeated and then loses the national championship. Like, they all feel like they failed, and it's like, dude, you went undefeated the entire season. Like, there's
you
so
got
many
to that game.
wins all the way up to right.
Yeah, and they're 300 and some odd Division I basketball teams.
Exactly.
So how many of those make it to the national championship game?
How many successes you had leading up to one more little thing you were trying to do?
And not just that season, but just to even be part of that team.
Right.
Yeah. It's a journey. Life is a journey. Everything we do is a journey, and
it so is.
I think we get caught up so much in the destination that sometimes we forget to pay attention to the scenery along the way. And that's been a big lesson for me too. I'm very aware of, as we all should be very aware of my own mortality. And I even wake up sometimes now. I'm 42, and I wake up and think, I'm a little creakier than I was last year. Or
tell me about it.
I can still run fast, but I have to try a lot harder and train harder to do that.
Yes.
But every day we get on this planet is a gift. And, that was part of, for me, digging out of, what grew into depression at times when Taylor was fighting her illness. And even earlier on and early in my college career, I battled depression. But every morning when we open our eyes, we have a decision to make. And I think that I believe in free will, and I think that we all can choose to be happy or not, no matter what kind of tragedies or difficulties we're facing in our own lives. And for me, it was, I might not be happy about the big picture right now, but damn, that cup of coffee was really good this morning. I was able to go and get a latte, or I was able to watch the sunrise today. And guess what? That's not something my sister can do anymore. So it's about, even when the big picture is difficult and we feel like we can't see past that to see the joy that's all around us, it's noticing the small things.
Yeah.
And that's gotten me through.
Yeah. So, sidebar, we're both in our 40s. There's something that occurs when you lose a sibling the way you did, obviously. There's also something that occurs when you reach the top of the hill and you're on your not you, but I'm at my top of the hill. I'm pretty sure statistically. And there's just a shift in priorities, and a lot of the way you see the world begins to change. Hopefully, if you're the kind of person that, is open to that kind of thing, you're into growth and awareness and insightfulness. But I also think that when we reach that place, we often want to look at the younger people and say, hey, you've got to pay attention. You got to be, thank every day, all these things. And that's something that we had to get to, and yes, things happen in life that can kind of fast track that. I guess I don't know if I have a question. I'd love for you to maybe just piggyback on kind of where my thoughts are going, because so many things that we go through as humans in the life journey, and we learn on the backside, and these things all of a sudden now they make sense, and it's really interesting. All the shifts and turns in my life have all converged to create some sort of path that makes sense to me now.
Mm-hmm.
And back then it did not. In fact, I was angry at it, and now I look back at these people that are younger than me, my nephews, and I'm trying to help them understand that this is going to make sense later. And like me, I didn't hear that then.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get there on my own.
Yeah. Well, I'll piggyback on one thing you said, Robbie, and you didn't say it in exact these words, but you talked a little bit, I think, about priorities shifting.
Yeah.
As we get older, and I've always been extremely driven. I think almost to a fault. When I battled depression as a freshman at UNC, it was because I thought I wasn't good enough. I wasn't the absolute smartest person on campus. I wasn't the best soccer player. I wasn't the fastest runner. I wasn't the best artist or best writer. It's really ridiculous. Now that I talk about it 20 years later, but I had that kind of mentality that I needed to be the best at everything, and if I wasn't, I was failing somehow, or I wasn't trying hard enough. And I delayed having a family until my later 30s. The first time they said, well, this is a geriatric pregnancy, I thought, oh my God, I was 36. But I delayed it. Big part was because of what my family was facing with Taylor's illness, but also I just kind of wasn't ready to be a mom. Like, I had all these things I wanted to do. I wanted to be successful in my career. I wanted to travel all over the world. I wanted to write a bestseller. I wanted to run races everywhere. It was all me. I was working so hard to try to save Taylor's life, but there was a lot of, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a lot of ego in there too. Not necessarily directly related to that work, but just what I wanted to achieve, what Laura wanted to be when she grew up. And this happens, I think, to a lot of us, or I hope it does, when we become parents for the first time. The first time I held my son in my arms, I thought, and this is what the story I tell everybody, I don't know if it's the same for you, but the thought that went through my head in that hospital bed was, if somebody told me I had to lie down on the train tracks right now to save you, I would, no question. And I've known you for 5 seconds, and you're this little, you're this little wrinkled, red crying thing, and I don't even know you yet. But that's how powerful becoming a parent is. And Jack's my son, and he's changed my perspective again. He's changed my priorities, and I still want to achieve those things that those dreams I've had, but I want to achieve them, and I pursue them through a different lens, and everything is, how can I do that while also being a good mother to him? What example am I setting for my son through my hard work? What lessons can I teach him? And Jack has an interesting story too, because, we've spent a lot of time talking about my sister Taylor. So Taylor had been very sick. She, it was a few weeks after her 20th birthday. This was in the fall of 2018. She was transferred to inpatient hospice at Presbyterian Hospital the day I went into labor. And she arrived by ambulance. She had been over at Atrium in their intensive care unit. We, made the tough decision to transfer her to inpatient hospice. She arrived by ambulance at the hospital where I was going to deliver 30 minutes before I did. That is a true story. She's fighting this disease for 12 and a half years now that since the diagnosis. And everything, we talk about coming to forks in the road and, actions we take that lead to certain moments. And everything I had done in my life to that point led to that moment, to that convergence of, Taylor was leaving this world as my son was entering. God. And he was born on September 20th on the 8th floor, and she died on September 26th, 5 floors beneath me.
Oh my God.
So my family was together in the hospital for those days, not under the circumstances that we wanted to be. But, I remember after I delivered, I was in the hospital gown, and they put me in a wheelchair, and my legs are still turned off. They put me on the elevator and took me downstairs to see my sister. And then a couple of hours later, my brother was there, and I was back in my room. He was in my sister's room, and we FaceTimed so Taylor and Jack could meet.
Oh my
So that's
Laura.
That stuff is real.
That is real.
That is real. And a lot of people's first reaction is they felt so bad for my family.
Mm-hmm.
How awful, how tragic that such a terrible thing, losing a child, would converge with the birth of a son and a grandson. It was my parents' first grandson,
Mm-hmm.
but it brought us together.
Yeah.
And I believe to this day that Jack he certainly saved me, but I think he also in a way saved my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was at home on maternity leave the week after he was born, and I was writing my sister's eulogy with my newborn sitting, lying on a blanket asleep beside me.
That is heavy.
It's a crazy life. How long do we have?
Oh, I know. I'd love to continue on.
We haven't even gotten into the training, the physical stuff I was doing on leave.
Oh my God. I know. Yeah, I mean, there have been times where I've had a guest on this podcast and I'm sitting here going, dude, I didn't know all this. I didn't know about all
There's
this.
some heavy, I mean, I've had to go down to the bottom. I mean, there were times I didn't know if I wanted to live.
Yeah.
Because I thought I hadn't tried hard enough and my sister was going to die. But yeah, I read my book.
Yes.
Because it is a, people think it's about running, but it's not. It's about seeing, hitting the bottom and figuring out how to swim to the top again. So when I was pregnant, I had already decided that this was in like February and Jack was born in September, but the 5-year anniversary of the first time I ran a half marathon blindfolded was coming up at the Charlotte Marathon that fall. And so I'm sitting in my doctor's office. We've just confirmed that yes, in fact, I'm pregnant. And I said, so I have this race and you're telling me my due date is September 24th and the race is November 3rd. And it's a half marathon. So it'll be, like 6 weeks after the kid's born. So I can do that, right? And she just kind of looks at me, and I think she figured out that I wasn't normal.
Yep.
But I did, in fact. So Jack was born on September 20th. He did me the favor of coming 4 days early, and at 4 days postpartum, which was the day we actually went home, I took a power walk through the neighborhood. And then I started walking with him and his stroller. And then at 2 weeks postpartum, I started running. And at about 6 weeks postpartum, I ran the Charlotte Half Marathon blindfolded.
You're an animal.
It was crazy. But it was one, you know what though? It was, and this is where I talk about sometimes, just there's, I believe so much in hard work and the results that can bring. But then sometimes things happen. And I can't explain them any way other than through magic. And and people who were on the course that day, this was November 3rd of 2018, say the same thing, that there's no other way to describe it than magic. My husband was at the finish line with my newborn. And we ran that race, and Andrew was my guide and very close friend. And Andrew and I ran that race in 2 hours and 3 minutes, and I was in a blindfold. I had a 6-week-old baby. But I remember going to the nail salon the day before the race, and I don't ever do color on my fingernails, but I got purple that day because it was Taylor's color, and the woman doing my nails put a little sparkle on the pinky finger that Taylor used to hold.
Oh, my God.
My book launched. So I had written a book, and by no planning of, my own, the book was released on November 1st, the weekend of the race. So all of these things just converging. So, the worst day physically of my my postpartum period was, I went to the race expo and I had a booth and I was signing books and I was there for about 8 hours. And, now we're getting real personal, but I pumped when my son was born and I couldn't pump for about 8 hours. So it's really, any women listening who've ever done that understand why that was a very bad day.
Yes.
But it was just, it was just crazy. I mean, we did the book launch party on Thursday night and then the race expo on Friday and then the race on Saturday. And meanwhile, I've got this newborn at home and I've just given a eulogy at my sister's packed memorial service in our church uptown. And in a way, it was a very sad time, but also in a way, I'd never felt lighter in my life. It was like I finally understood what this life means and why we're all here and the fact that we all have a purpose. And if we can embrace that purpose, just the amazing things that we can do. And Taylor's been gone for 6 years now, almost 7 years, and she still tells me that every day.
So we're going to cut here and we're going to come back for part 2. This is a story that deserves a longer conversation and a longer period of time. And I don't want us to get sick and tired of each other. So all the listeners out there,
somebody walking in.
we will be back for part 2 of Laura King Edwards' life journey.